Alright, track recurrency 2016. Course overview, emergency response guide, adjacent track protection review, PDF violation report compilation review, ballast technical bulletin, general manual review, TTCI field exercise mini session. Adjacent track protection, CFR 214.336. FRA technical training manual is intended for the internal instructional purpose only, but they do not distribute to the FRA state agency pursuant to Title 49 CFR 212. What happened as a result of the rules change we made with the re-existing subparts of the Roadway Workplace Safety Regulation 214.7, 214.315, 214.335, and new rule 214.336 was added. 214.7 was amended by introducing introductory text. 214.315A changed with the provided digital information job brief with the subsection rewritten to include adjacent track discussion in job briefing. 214.335 change heading paragraph was removed. FRA technical materials intended with internal instruction purpose only, with not distributed by the FRA or state agency pursuant to the Title 49 CFR Part 212. 214.7 intro text, unless otherwise provided as part of the used in this part, with the prior to listing definition change necessary to reason. With the clarify with the definition applied with the 214 note necessary with the other parts of the CFR to ensure the addition with the similar definitions, adjacent track and adjacent control track that are applicable only with the 214.336 that do not conflict with any way with the same of the terms of the general definition section. Note, the definition adjacent track still apply to any of the other sections part 214 unless otherwise provided when the section of the term is used. 214.315A OTS job briefing. The employer assigned with the duty of the road work with the call for the employee with the file track with the employer shall provide for the employee with the OTS job briefing and include with the minimum of the following: 1. Information with the means of which of the track is to be provided with each of the track and identified and filed. 2. The instruction of each of the track safety procedure to be filed. 3. Information about adjacent tracks on track safety for such tracks if required by the subpart deemed necessary by the roadway worker in charge, and identification of any of the roadway maintenance machines with the file such tracks, and discussion with the nature of the work performed, characteristics, work location, and ensure compliance. 214.335. 214.335 received the heading of the chain with the word of the general now reads: 214.335 on track safety procedure for the roadwork groups for general. Paragraph C, 213.335 roadway groups engaged with a large scale maintenance of the construction shall provide with a train approach warning according to the 214.327 for movement to adjacent tracks that not include with the working limits was removed. 214.336 of adjacent track protection, initially published with the becoming effective of November 30, 2011, and in response to the petition reconsideration, FRA developed with an effective of the date July 1, 2013, request for the comments of the petition. November 2011, the final rules amended to clarify certain of the section of the rule made with the July 1st, 2014. The two final rules not consolidated into one of the reference must made with the revision contained in 214 final with the rule to ensure proper application. Adjacent track protection definition. The definition of this section play a large part with the understanding application of the rule must be considered with the making an assessment with the proper application of the rule. Remember the definition in section 214.336 apply applicable only in this section. Adjacent track production definitions from 214.7. The following of the track. The placement of the individual in an item with equipment is such with the proximity of the track. The individual equipment could be struck with a moving train or on-track equipment, or in any case within 4 feet of the field side of the running rail. Adjacent track per definition 214.336A3. Occupied track means with the track on with the track safety propel with equipment coupling with a coupled equipment engagement authorized with the permitted located engaged common task roadway grouper with at least one roadway workers on the ground. Adjacent track protection, the 214.336A3. Adjacent track meaning with the control track, who with the track standing with 19 feet or left of the track standing with the occupied track. The occupied track can be controlled or non-controlled and should have the occupied track 19 feet or left of the control track. Adjacent track protection definition 214.336A3. Adjacent track meaning with the controlled, non-controlled track with the track standing with a space at least 25 feet for the track with the center of the occupied track and should have less than 25 feet. Adjacent track protection definition 214.336A3. Minor correction means one with a more reparative of the nature of it include, but not limited to welding, spiking, anchoring, hand tamping, joint bowl replacement. They are accomplished with a hand tools, handheld, with a hand support, with a hand guide power tool. The term does not include machine spiking, machine tamping, any similar distracting repair. Adjacent track protection definition 214.336A3 with an interior track barrier, meaning with a continuous barrier with a permanent, semi-permanent nature with a span with the entire of the work at least 4 feet with a height, and there is sufficient terrain to prevent a road work from following adjacent track. An adjacent track protection required. Ask first, as the adjacent track protection required, then what procedures must be followed. 214.336 adjacent track protection application. Do you have an adjacent control track within 19 feet? Is the on-track self-propelled coupled equipment on the occupied track? Is there one or more roadway workers on the ground engaged with a common task with equipment? Is work other than the inspection minor correction being performed? Or one of the other exemptions, mechanic, sanitary, towers, ATIP, or etc.? If you answer no to any of these questions, 214.336 does not apply. 214.336A with the procedures general. The procedures general rule. So provided in paragraph E of the section on track is required with each of the adjacent control track when the road work group at least one of the road workers on the ground is engaged with a common task with the on-track self-propelled equipment coupled equipped with the occupied track with the required on-track safety shall be established in 214.319 working limit general or 214.329 training approach warning provided with the watchman lookouts and is more specifically described in this section. 214.336A procedures general 2 special circumstances arising territory with at least 3 track with the occupied track as being 2 adjacent control tracks. If the occupied track 2 adjacent tracks concurrent with the movement authorized one of these movement is a speed greater than 25 F and 40 P for the most restricted procedure. Paragraph B applies. 214.336E exemption for this rule. No adjacent track protection is needed with a work group successfully performing one or more of 3 activities. Exemptions for the rule with no adjacent track protection is needed when on the ground performs on-site occupied meeting specific condition working on the side of the track away from the move with the interior track barrier. 2 maintenance and repairs performed alongside with the perimeter of the road maintenance machine coupled equipment on the equipment occupied track. Machine physically limits you from getting on to the other track. 3. Work activities involving the equipment and purpose for the inspection, minor repair. Exemptions. On the ground work performed on the side of the occupied track, meeting specified conditions. Work group with all the on-ground workers other than the working under the but another exemption with a paragraph performing the work while exclusively positioned on side of the occupied track as follows. 1. The site has no adjacent track. 2. The side with the one or more adjacent tracks closed for the has working limit is on it and no movements permitted. The side of one or more adjacent tracks provided that there's an inter-track barrier before the next track. 214.336E exemptions working on continuing side no adjacent track should and no track is needed. 214.336E exemptions E1, 2 when it can be continued on site with a one or more adjacent track with the closest on which for the working limits with no movement is permitted and no adjacent track is needed. Protection is needed. 214.336E exemptions E1, 3 work can continue on site with a one or more adjacent tracks provided if their interior barrier before the next track. Show side B, side A2, side A1 interior track barrier. 214.336E with exemption for this role. No adjacent track protection is needed when on the ground performed on the side of the occupied track, meaning specific conditions working outside of the track and move from the move with an interior barrier. 2. Maintenance for the repairs performed either alongside with the perimeter of the roadway maintenance machine coupled on equipment of the occupied track with the machine physically limits for getting on the other track. 3. Work activities involved with the certain equipment purpose of the inspection minor repair. 214.336E exemption E2 for the maintenance for the repair performed alongside within the perimeter of the roadway maintenance machine coupled with equipment of the occupied track. No adjacent track protection is needed when road worker perform maintenance repairs alongside of the road maintenance RMM or coupled equipment that provide with the side for the beginning equipment that effectively prevent worker from following adjacent track control with the on the other side of the equipment for the maintenance for the repair performed with the position on the side of the occupied track as described in paragraph E1. 214.336E with exemption E2 with the maintenance repair performed alongside within the perimeter of the roadway maintenance machine coupled equipment over the occupied track with no adjacent track protections needed with the roadway maintenance under the RRM coupled with equipment performed mainly with the repairs within the perimeter of the machine equipment provided with no part of the person brake for the plane of the railway occupied track except for the towards one of the side of the occupied track describing the E1 with the boom with the other equipment extending the M with the body of the RMM or a couple of equipment toward adjacent control track with not considered within the perimeter of the machine. 214.336E exemption E2, 1 and 2, no adjacent track protection needed with the mechanic alongside with the machine between them and with the adjacent track under the machine if they do not brake plane with the railway live track side. 214.336E exemption for the rule no adjacent track protection is needed with the on-ground work performed on the side of the occupied track meeting specification working on side track of the move away from the move within interior barrier. 2 maintenance for the repair performed alongside with a perimeter roadway maintenance machine coupled equipment with the occupied track with the machine physically limits you to getting on the other track. Work activity involved with the track and equipment and purpose with the high rails and the inspection minor repair ATIP and catenary tower cars. 214.336E exemption E3 the work activity involved with certain equipment and purpose of no adjacent track protection is needed on ground roadway workers engaged with the common tab of the occupied track with the on-stack slow propelled equipment coupled with equipment consisting exclusively with the following a high rail-bound vehicle being used for the inspection minor correction no coupled equipment in multiple vehicles must have job briefing. 2 automated inspection vehicle with a catenary maintenance tower car with when the on-ground workers are between the rails solely for their apply with the remove of the grounds. Adjacent track protection definition 214.336A3 for the minor correction means one or more of the repairs nature with include but not limited welding, spiking, anchoring, hand tamping, joint, bowl replacement. They're accomplished with the hand tools with the head been supported with a hand guide with the power tools and does not include machine spiking, machine tamping, or similar distracting repair. Alright, E3 continued. If such for the road work excited group of the accepted group is otherwise operating some occupied track while working limited to a separate roadway group of the performing work with the subject of the requirements of the section no exempted group of the price first of the performance must conduct on track safety job brief to determine adjacent control track on safety necessary with the expected group. If an expected work group is a non-expected work group occupy the same limits have a job briefing. 214.336E3 continues so the determination must be made by the RWIC with the working limits. If the group suffer the proximity ability with the road work with expect for the group to hear with the approaching tool with the on-track equipment is impaired with the background north light slight obstruction of any of the physical condition called with the equipment of this exemption does not apply with adjacent track protection must be provided in both groups. 214.336E with the E3 no adjacent tracks is needed with all lots of the fine print. Adjacent track protection is required. As first is the adjacent track required, and then what procedures must be followed. Procedures for passing speeds over 25F and the 40P. Proceed with the move with it to over 25F and the 40P of the train. Other equipment authorized to move with it over an adjacent control track at a speed greater than 25 miles an hour or at a speed greater than 40 miles per hour with the passenger train. Passenger track equipment to movement of each roadway worker and roadway group is effective with the test movement must comply with the following procedures. 214.336B with the procedures passing speed with over 25 miles an hour freight, 40 miles per hour passenger, proceed with the 25 miles per hour freight, 40 passenger, ceasing work, except for the work activity described in paragraph E with the section of the effect of the road work described in the table with one case all of the groundwork of an equipment and movement and with the between the rails occupied with on one of the whole side of the occupied track occupy a predetermined place of the safety upon notification warning movement of the adjacent track. 214.336B with the procedure for the passing speed over the 25 freight 40 passenger procedure for the 25 miles an hour freight 40 passenger resuming work resume the after trailing end of all the train with other track equipment and pass for the remains ahead of the roadway worker. If the train and other track equipment system stops before trailing end pass of the road worker, the worker resumes on with the train approach for the established adjacent control track. The RWIC established the further movement should be made only but permitted by the RWIC. 214.336B proceed with the passing of over 25 miles an hour freight, 40 miles an hour passenger, open upon movement notification warning track 1 speeds greater than 25 miles an hour freight and 40 miles per hour passenger, cease all work and movement to occupy PPOS, and shows all work stop, all movement stop, all move stop, all move stop, all work stop. Working limited train approaching side A and track 1, side A and track 1, working limited train approaching warning. 214.336C, procedure with a passing speed of 25 miles an hour for 840 passenger or less. Proceed with a 25 mile an hour for 840 passenger or less. The movement authorized Jason control with a 25 miles an hour for 840 miles an hour or less. Each of the roadwork, ward work group of the effect of the movement must comply with the paragraph B with the section exempts equipment. The movement of the continued occupied truck on ground with the may continue with the between of the rail does not break with the plane. The occupied truck more not in 25 feet with a ahead of or behind the truck itself with the propelled equipment, a couple of equipment over the occupied truck. The only changes proceed with the move are above or below the speed thresholds. Show the procedure for the passing speed of 25 mile an hour, 40 mile an hour passenger or less. Upon movement and notification warning number 1, less than 25 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour passenger cease work occupied with the PPOS with the 2 exemption. Track side B to note less than 25 feet or less, and side A working limited train approaching equipment movements of the rail occupied track may continue. On ground work performed exclusively between the rails may continue provided no ground worker performed in the area of 25 feet with the front and behind any of the track equipment. Adjacent track protection. Congratulations, you now know the bulk of the rule. More than 25 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour passenger cease all work move with the occupied track, occupied PPOS. Moves 25 an hour, 40 miles an hour plus or mile an hour or less. Same exempt moves that may continue with ongoing work may continue if greater than 25 feet from the machines. Additional rules for 3 tracks. Do not worry, we'll get there. Discrete roadway worker in charge. Nothing in some part prohibit the roadway worker charge establishing on-track safety one or more adjacent track he or she deemed it necessary consistent with the bold purpose and requirements of the subpart. 214.336E with exemption for the rule. No adjacent protection is needed for the work group exclusively performing one or more of the following 3 activities. Exemption for the rule. No adjacent track protection is needed when on ground performed on site of the occupied track with a meeting specific condition. Worker on site of the track to move within the interior bracket. Mainly for the repair performed either alongside with a permit or roadway maintenance machine coupled with equipment over the occupied track with the machine physically limits of you getting on the track. Work activities involve certain equipment for purpose of the inspection, minor repair. 214.336F for the components of the RRM follows an adjacent track with except for the provided 214.341C for the component of the RRM should not follow the adjacent control track unless for the working limit to establish adjacent control track where no movement of the permit with the RWIC that would affect with the road workers engaged in common tasks of such machine. 214.341C component of the RRM should be kept clear of the passing train of the operation conditions permit of the RMM to be at least less than 4 feet from the adjacent track. OTS program railroad should include the instructions necessary to provide adjacent clearing between the RMM and passing trains. Examples, and it shows a person getting tied up to the trains. Alright, side A, occupied to the side with the vertical plane with the next ring with the rail, occupied with the train exceeding for the following speed with the adjacent control track with number 1. Method of the on-track safety side A with the requirements working limited for the train with approaching upon receipt of the notification warning movement notification of the or warning number 1 ceases work occupied permitted predetermined place of safety occupied track on one or more between the rails occupied number 2 track around the track safety established working limit requirements. Upon movement, the notification warning of the number 1 seat for the permit occupy the PPOS, except for the continuing during movements for the number 1 authorized 25 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour less passenger train move with the maintain 15 to 25 feet spacing. Side B, occupied track either one side with no adjacent traffic to the side with a vertical plane near the running rail. Occupied track extending outward toward the following space with adjacent control track number 3 track. Requirements met with the on-track safety side B. Work is not required to proceed during number 1, not applicable because there are no adjacent track. For example, the one passing over 25 miles an hour freight 40 passengers. Notification for the movement over the track 1 greater than 25 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour. Passenger side B may continue occupied. Track C, all work movement to occupy PPOS. Should side A and side B all work stop, all move stops. Working limited with the approaching train. Working warning. Side A, cease all works movement to the occupied PPOS. Passing 25 mile an hour, 40 passenger or less. Notification of the movement of the track 1, 45 mile an hour, 25 for 40 miles an hour or less. Side B, working may continue. Occupied track cease work, occupied PPOS, except movement may continue. Work may continue greater than 25 feet of the equipment. Side B, at least 25 feet spaced out. Side B, working train approaching. Side A, cease work, occupied all PPOS. Alright, side A, over the occupied track with the side with a vertical plane near running with a rail occupied track extending out with the following space adjacent track, method of the track onside safety requirements, working limited upon notification number 1, cease work and occupied PPOS work not required to current cease during the movement is number 3. Occupied tracks on behind with the occupied track number 2 track on track safety established with the working limit of requirements. Upon movement notification number 1 and number 3 cease work occupied PPOS except work may continue during such movements. Number 1 and number 3 authorized 25 miles an hour or less or 40 miles an hour or less passenger train movement if spacing 25 feet. Side B, the occupied track E, the number 1 side with no adjacent track, the 2 side with a vertical plane with the near the running occupied extending to the outward with the following space with adjacent control track number 3. Requirements method on track safety side B with upon movement notification number 3. C with the occupied PPOS work of the not required C during the movement of the number 1, and that's within the working limits. An example of single mode 25 mile an hour, 40 miles an hour or less. Notification movement on track 1, 25 mile an hour, 40 miles an hour or less. Side B, work may continue occupied track over the chief of the work occupied PPOS except that may continue the work over the greater than 25 miles an hour. Track 3, working limit side B of track 2 would be 25 miles an hour, 25 feet or less spacing between the Peterson. Side A, working limit side A, cease work occupied PPOS. A double move, 25 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour left. Navigation movement of the track 1 and 3, 25 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour or less. Side B, cease work on PPOS, occupied track cease work, occupied PPOS, except the may continue work making greater than 25 mile an hour equipment. And cease, side A, cease work, occupied PPOS. Example 3, side A, with the occupied track on the side with the vertical plane near running rail, occupied turning track extending outward following space with adjacent track with the number 1 track method of on-track safety A, requirements working limit upon modification with the number 1 C for the work occupied PPOS, work is not required to cease during movement of number 3, occupied track on between the occupied number 1, 2 track on-track safety established through work limited requirements. Upon moving the notification number 1 and 3 with the chief of the work of the PPOS, except for the way continue with the movement of number 1 and 3 authorized 25 mile an hour, 40 mile an hour or less, if maintained 25 mile spacing. Side B, occupied track with either one side with no adjacent to the side with a vertical plane with the running rail, occupied track extending with outward through the following space with the adjacent track. Number 3 track, requirements method of the track safety side B, upon movement of warning with the number 3 notification with the number 1 cease work, occupied PPOS track train approaching warning. Example 3, move on track 1, 25 mile an hour, 40 miles or less. Notification movement of track 1, 25 mile and 40 hour or less. Side B, cease work, occupied PPOS. Occupied track cease work, occupied PPOS. Move with the may continue where making greater than 25 feet with equipment train approaching train 3. Side B, side A, working limits. Side A, cease work, occupied PPOS. Example 3, move track 3 with 25 mile an hour, 40 miles an hour or less. Navigation movement of track 5, 25 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour or less. Sub B, cease work, PPO, and occupied PPOS. Occupied track cease work, occupied PPOS, except for the may continue. Work may continue 25 greater than 25 feet from the equipment. Side A, work may continue. Example 3, moving down the track 3, 25 mile and 40 miles an hour left, 19 to 25 foot standards notification of the track on 3, 40 foot 25 to 40 miles an hour or less. Cease work occupied PPOS on side B. Occupied cease work occupied PPOS. Success may continue, may move with greater than 25 feet of equipment. Track 3, train approaching. Number 3, file zone. Side B, possible PPOS. Side B, at least 25 feet. And side A, working limits. For example 4, side A with the occupied track with the top of the vertical plane with the near of the running rail with the occupied track with extending with the out of the following space. J for the control track. Number 1 track method for the on-track safety. A requirement train approaching warning upon movement of warning. Number 1. Number 2, 3, C for the work occupied PPOS. Occupied track and one of the both on both between the rail with the occupied track. Number 2 track with the on-track established working limits. Woman upon working with the number 1 and 3 work occupied PPOS except for the continuing with the other movement is number 1 and number 3. 25 mile an hour or 40 mile an hour freight and passenger maintain 25 feet spacing. Alright, side B, occupied track, either 1, the side of the adjacent track, 2, the side of the vertical plane near the running rail, occupied track extending the outward through the following of the extending space adjacent control track. The requirement method over the on-track side is decided by on movement number 1 and the number 3 with the number 1 cease work occupied PPS train approach warning. Example 4, move on either the track 25 mile an hour, 40 miles an hour or less. Some notification movement of the track 3, 25 to 40 miles an hour or less. Side B, cease work occupied PPOS, occupied track cease work occupied PPOS. Success may continue. Work may greater than if 25 feet from the equipment. Train approaching side A, B, 25 feet or less. Side A, train approaching track warning 1. Example 5, side A with the occupied vertical plane with the running occupied track and extending with the out with the following spaces. J for the number 1 track and number 1. Method of on-track safety A, none of the interior bracket with the worker prohibited one up the barrier not required. The C for the barrier with the near the running railroad occupied track determining movement is for the number 1. Occupied track with the between the occupied track. Number 2 with the number 2 with the wear on the track safety is established working limit. The requirements work is not required. Cease during movement at number 1. Side B with the occupied, either the 1 for the adjacent, for the 2 with the side with the vertical plane, near with the running rail occupied track. Rail extending out with the following with the speed with adjacent with the control track. Number 3 and number 3 track number 3. Requirements method of the track safe sides B to B. Work is not required. C for during the number 1 and not applicable because there is no adjacent track. Example 5, inter-track barrier with non-notification movement of the track 1, any speed side B, work may continue, no restriction, occupied track may continue with no restriction, side A2 may work may continue, no restriction, shows side B, A2 with an inter-track barrier, side A1 track, no OTS, work is prohibited on side 1A. Example 6, side A with the occupied with the vertical plane with the near the running occupied track, and extending the outward through with the following speed with the adjacent track with number 1 track with number 1. Method with the on-track safety A with the requirement done over the interior track barrier workers provided with the A1 work 3 with the required with the C with the side A2 with the drawing with the movement is number 1 and number 3. Occupied track on between the rail with the occupied number 2 track with the number 2. When on-track safety established with the working limit, the requirements of the work is not required to cease during the movement is number 1. Side B with the occupied track with either one side adjacent to the side from the vertical plane with the near running rail occupied track with extending outward through the following speed with the D for the control track with number 3 and number 3. Requirement method on track safety side B with the upon notification 1 with the number 3. C for the work occupied PPOS work with the 3 with the not required to C for the during the movement on the number 1. Working limit the train approaching warning. Example 6, triple track with single interior track barrier notification movement of the track 3, 25 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour passenger beside BC for the work on PPOS. Occupied track cease work occupied PPOS except moves may continue work may continue greater than 25 feet from the equipment. Side A2 work may continue no restriction. Track 3 working limit the train approaching. Side B at least 25 feet from the equipment. Side A2 and then the barrier. Side A1 is prohibited. No track 1 no OTS. Adjacent track petition required as first adjacent track petition. Then procedure must be followed. 214.336 adjacent track protection application. Do you have an adjacent control track within 19 feet of the on-track safety propelled coupled equipment and occupied track? Is there one or more road work when on ground engaged common task of the equipment? Is the work other than the inspection minor correction being performed and one over the other exemption mechanics, catenary tower, water, ATIP, etc.? If you have no answer to any of these questions, 214.336 does not apply. Module complete. Track recurrency 2016. Jason track protection 214.336. Should the maintenance away learning curve. Ballast technical bulletin. Objectives. Understanding the four functions of the ballast that must meet with the understanding of the current guidance at 213.103 with ballast. Ballast requirements. Ballast must transmit the distributed loads and restrain track directions under load and provide adequate drainage and maintain proper cross-level surface alignment. Technical bulletin TB 1401. When technical bulletin includes your supplemental orders. 2. Technical bulletin 1401 highlights ballast can be made anything that meets with the performance standard of the function 213.103. Look for the degrading component with the geometry. See if the ballast performing four functions. Consider safety risk. Consult with a specialist before writing defects, violation, class 1 track, definition, geometry, condition. Technical bulletin 1401 highlights in the account of the geometry of the aggravating factors concerning enforcement action, track speed, track density, professor, hazmat, track net, rate of degradation, tie condition, location, rail, switches, joint, bridges, and standing water. Ballast standards discussion point. There's the length of the requirements of profile of the cross level requirements issue. The same of the areas can write with the file ballast class 1 track. Should you, when you, would you, and wouldn't you? Module complete. Track recurrency 2016 file ballast technical bulletin. And that completes the track recurrency of 2016.